Test. Test. All right, test. 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 Hello, test. Test.
I sent out a second email yesterday. The only one that won't be here is Rachel. She's on vacation.
I'm being honest. Hey, Karen, can you stay?
So I didn't get a confirmation like who all's coming, but the committee's me. Lori's here. Me, Eli, Rachel, Troy, Henry. Lori's here. No, my mic's off. Just check.
Hi,
No, she's just.
how are you?
Or
I was at,
next to Henry.
I'm
Huh?
a speech child person. I can't.
Took care of your.
Yeah, no, I remember you.
Yeah.
You just done moved up in the world. That's all. All straight and everything. I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. I see you hang your tough.
Usually I do.
Oh, absolutely. Come down here and see the party.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
You need anything from me?
How did your daughter
No,
know?
I just,
What time are you about to have?
years now, or all the oldest one in Howard, I borrowed some of your language.
Yeah, my daughter started off so. Yeah. That's too bad. Yeah. Good.
Yes, so the mayor, after you read this, whatever you guys need to do, the mayor will kick us off.
So I'll have to introduce you.
Yep.
And I thought this would be good just for information purposes, it would be out in the public.
Yeah, and we are going to, so that obviously the seasons with budget hearings will be based on departments, but we'll still maintain some of the strategic stuff, that kind of language, so that's still relevant.
Okay, Doc, it's you.
It's here, everyone's favorite time of year.
So did you check the file? I'm not gonna call his name.
At this point, no, I'm just gonna remove him.
I don't know if she saw that, Justin.
Hello, can you hear
Testing.
me?
I can
Hello?
hear you, Karen.
Oh, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna see if I can get on my, desktop.
Testing. Okay. Can you hear me? Is my mic on? Oh, okay.
You're
All right.
starting a trend now, right? I may not be here Monday, but I
Mics are
might
lifted?
have to come in virtually, so.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I would like to call the Personal and Finance Committee meeting to order. It is now 5 o'clock on August the 17th. Clerk Jones, if you could call the roll and then make any comments that you may need about people that are meeting virtually with us.
Okay. Committee Chair Niskoski,
Present.
Committee Vice Chair Wax,
Present.
Committee Member Warner,
Present.
Committee Member Thomas Morgan.
She is absent.
Oh, okay. Committee Member Davis. We have 3 present.
Thank you.
Okay. And good evening, members of the public. For audio quality, your mics will be muted, and I'm talking to the virtual audience. Your mics will be muted for audio quality purposes. If you would like to say something during the meeting or after the meeting, if you would like to provide public input, please put your name in the chat and your address, and you will be called on. Are you doing public? Okay, you will be called on by the council president or vice president. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Clerk Jones. Welcome, everyone. This is the kickoff for this year's budget for 2023. This evening, we're going to hear from Mayor Mueller and the City Controller, Mr. Dan Parker, as they begin to roll out this year's budget. I'd like to begin by offering a few words to the public who may not be informed about how the budget process works. The budget is based on input from department heads, and the City Controller then submits a proposed budget request to the mayor, and then the mayor revises those based on his input. The process for the administration starts in May and is usually wrapped up by August. The budget's based on baseline spending, which is the core responsibilities of the city. Strategic spending identifies investments that allow our residents to thrive. The spending is broke down into 2 categories: strategic operations and strategic initiatives. Strategic operations are ongoing operations and departments that are outside of core government services. Strategic initiatives represent both citywide initiatives and investments in specific areas of the city that are ongoing operations. Investments from grants, specific programs, or capital projects, which are meant to accomplish priorities that are related to neighborhood development. The council's job is to pass the budget based on all the presentations made and feedback from residents. This means that the adopted budget is usually different than the originally proposed budget. The council cannot increase the budget or fund programs, but we can decrease the budget. After the presentation, 2 questions can be asked from council members. Then we'll open up the meeting to the public. 2 questions from each member of the public can be asked during the public portion of the meeting. If there are additional questions from council members or the public, please submit the questions to me, and I'll ensure that they'll be placed in the folder and directed to the appropriate department. After the public portion is completed, council members may make additional statement. The time that is allowed for the public portion of the meeting may not exceed the time of the presentation. Please keep your questions germane to the presentation and maintain a decorum that is respectful to everyone. A maximum of 5 minutes is allotted for each questionnaire. Rude, disrespectful, or disruptive speech or actions will not be tolerated. Such speech or actions, as well as verbal attacks on any person, may result in the individual, without notice, forfeiting the remainder of his or her allotted time. Thank you. So at this time, I would like to present to us Mayor James Mueller for the presentation. And Mr. Dan Parker.
Mayor Bueller's gonna.
The virtual Zoom here really gets it right there without having to connect, so that's great. Good evening, Council. Mayor James Mueller with offices on the 14th floor of this building, and I'm pleased to kick off the official part of this section of the council portion of the budget season. Of course, as Vice President Sheila Nisgotsky mentioned, the administration has been working for a few months now informing this budget to present to you, and as we work with you over the coming weeks. Of course, we were thrilled to get feedback from almost all of you about what council's priorities are, and I hope that as we go through this, not just tonight, but as we go through each department in the coming weeks, you'll see that we've worked very hard to incorporate as many of the priorities as we can, and if we weren't able to do something exactly that council had prioritized, we tried to come up with something we could do that we thought addressed at least part of the need that council was highlighting. So I want to first start with, let's see, is this the strategic context now that we're going into budget season. It's, of course, part of a larger picture of where we want to go, where do we want to go, and I don't know what's quite going on with the audio here. Someone's feedback here? On the computer? It is. It is off. It could have been someone else on Zoom. So yes, please mute your mics so we don't get feedback here in council chambers. So as I was mentioning, it's important to know where we are, where we're trying to go, of course, and the budget is one of the ways in which we get to where we want to go, but we do need to know where we are and where we want to go first before we even think about how the budget's going to get us there. So you've seen us continue to update this slide as new information comes in. Again, the recovery, this is showing our recovery. On the left is GDP for South Bend metro area, and then on the right is employment. And so you see on GDP, we had the recovery that's, a couple quarters ago. Looks like we got back to or exceeded the pre-pandemic levels of output. Then we've kind of zigzagged here a little bit, but generally it looks like we did follow the aggressive growth rebound and not the muted recovery scenario. Then on the right, you see a slightly different picture. and this looks like some of the data on employment has been revised downward. As we looked at previous versions of this graph, it had looked closer to match the left graph, that it was closer to the growth rebound scenario. But it does look like employment has been slower to come back. But as you know, unemployment rates are near record lows. It's not necessary. There are a lot of employment opportunities that our employers are looking to get people to fill. Just for whatever reason, we're not able to get those numbers up to where they were pre-pandemic yet. But that's something that's a priority, is how do we get our city back to work and back to a growth trajectory for our economy. If you recall, this was probably a year or so ago when we were talking about strategy for the American Rescue Plan dollars. We talked about how those may fit into all the other things that are going on at the federal and state level. This is you guys have seen this before, but the main programs at the time that were being discussed was the Endless Frontier Act, READY, which is the state program, State Innskeepers Tax and Performance Development Convention Development Tax, the Jobs Physical Infrastructure Plan, the American Rescue Plan, and then, of course, at that time, it was called the Families Plan, or the social infrastructure side of it. So obviously, the right side, the right one, the Families Plan, never happened. But here's where we are today, and I took out the Innskeeper and the other state programs because we've talked about those at length and started moving on that. So just for a quick recap there, the Innskeeper tax, there were dedicated funds that went to the zoo and the Morris project, and those have moved through council. So thank you for your support of those projects through the Innskeepers tax. And they are also right now in midst of reviewing. They had a set aside for annual competitive grants, and so they've received a lot of applications for the Innkeepers competitive grant. I believe they're calling it the Tourism Development Fund, but they're actively considering that right now, and hopefully South Bend will see some projects funded out of that fund and get that news in the coming weeks. And then the performance sports development, that's something that we're still looking to figure out best use for that. Of course, the early funds were to put toward the Cubs Stadium, that were the upgrades that were required in order to meet the new standards for the new minor league system. So here, the other programs are still on this slide in the current outlook, and we have a little more clarity on what's what. The infrastructure bill is passed. Some of the programs are already being, unveiled over an 8 to 10 year period. If you saw the news yesterday or the day before, we did receive a competitive raise grant for the Cloverleaf section over there on Eddy and where Sample and Eddy combine over across the river, and so and that area. So we're calling that the Market District project. So we're excited to get those. Were planning dollars, of course. After the plan, then there would hopefully be a construction phase grant from the federal government, and also construction dollars we'd have to work on. So this is the planning grant, but as you know, it's generally a factor of 10 when you think of planning grants versus construction costs. So a $2.5 to $3 million plan will probably end up in a $25 to $30 million project. And those are looked to be split 80-20, so 80% federal funds, 20% local funds. READY is, our region did win the maximum award of $50 million, and they put out an RFP a few weeks ago. That closed for quality of place projects, brick and mortar part of it. That window closed this past Monday, and they are now reviewing a number of projects that have been submitted. We'll get to that in a minute. And then, of course, just on Tuesday, President Biden signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't have what the Families Plan has, the paid and family leave or pre-K, universal pre-K. It doesn't have those social programs, but does have a lot on the climate and energy piece. And probably more pertinent for us and local government is there were some funds for what was called environmental justice and cleanups of, so hopefully getting some funds to programs that have been chronically underfunded to make sure we have the resources. And hopefully South Bend will be able to get our fair share to help with those issues here locally. So I mentioned Ready, the applications for the quality of place closed on Monday, and South Bend applicants submitted requests totaling over $40 million in Ready funds. And so the way this works is the Ready funds would have to be matched 1-to-1 by local dollars and 3-to-1 from the Ready funds by private or external dollars. And obviously, it was $50 million award for the whole region, which includes St. Joseph County, Elkhart County, Marshall County. So whatever, obviously we think our fair share of the $50 million is, probably larger than what we'll get. But, it's safe to say that unfortunately not every project that was submitted is going to get selected by the RDA, the Regional Development Authority. But nevertheless, we do hope to get, a number of our big projects funded out of this. And so these are just, there are more projects that were submitted by South Bend applicants. These are just some of the major ones that we've been talking about or you have seen in the paper or on the news. And so the Memorial Tower expansion in Beacon Lifestyle District, that's the tower itself is a $300+ million investment, plus that would lead to close to 600 new jobs, good paying jobs. And then the district itself that composes of the mega block between the hospital and Lasalle is looking to be about proposed to be about $140 million of investment. Of course, the Morris 100 project that we're already underway in terms of the renovation phase, that's looking to be a $30 million plus project. That submitted. The Dream Center that we know about is looking to be an $18+ million project. The Career Center, which is a collaboration with the schools, not just South Bend schools, but other schools in St. Joseph County, is proposing a $25 million CTE facility. So there are more details to come on that, but that's something that we think is exciting for our community and for our future. And then, the Housing Authority, we've been talking about that for some time. It came up during last budget season. The plans now look to be an estimated cost of $35 million over by the Rabbi Shulman complex. So those, they all submitted, and then there were a number of other projects that submitted by developers. Then the American Rescue Plan. I know you guys have seen this quite a bit. Just a reminder of all the different programs that were budgeted as part of last year's budget process and getting the American Rescue Plan dollars. I know there was a conversation at the last meeting about which funds are left over. There may be some, but it's not a lot. Even the lines where you see right now zero committed, the team is certainly working hard to get the housing financing, the home repair, and the other programs going. So right now, there's nothing in here that's a project that's not moving forward. It's just some of those have moved slower than others, and of course we know we had conversations about staffing levels in community investment during the budget process, and that has slowed some of the projects there in community investment. But generally speaking, they're moving full speed ahead. There were a question about projects that are completed, like utility relief. Just full disclosure there, with inflation and other things, we don't know yet, but we may need to come back and transfer money to solid waste in particular with the rising fuel costs. Well, I mean, there's multiple ways we could do it. Normally, our preference is strongly to fund enterprise funds out of fees, but we did make a promise to this council that we wouldn't come back for rate increases for a period of time, and we want to honor that. But so we may need to come back and use some of those funds to keep the solid waste fund solvent if we do need that next year. So there are things like that that, even though that program is complete and out the door, there are things that may make sense to use it for. And then, like I said, the projects are, every project listed on this is moving forward, and we would love to, the team would love to share updates about any ones that you're interested in hearing full updates on, and share where we are and where we think it's going. And I'm sure some of this will come up during the individual budget meetings. And then as you know, we've also been aggressively pursuing neighborhood plans. And so, some of the recently developed ones and passed by the council have been the West Side Main Street Southeast Neighborhood Master Plan, the NNN, and the Near West Side. We are currently working to complete the Rum Village Neighborhood Plan, the Northeast Neighborhood Plan, Kennedy Park. Monroe Park is one that was started this year. Those other three were ones we started last year. So those first three will be hopefully wrapping up quickly, and Monroe Park will probably move into next year. And then for next year, the plans are to work on the Lasalle Park neighborhood and River Park neighborhood plan, as well as, we're just about to really kick off the city's comprehensive plan. So the 20-year vision for what we want to see for South Bend in 2045. So some of the takeaways from the strategic context is there are still a number of historic opportunities for transformation with federal funding, state funding, and things we just haven't seen for a long time. We need to continue to be bold and aggressive to pursue these opportunities. And part of being bold and aggressive will be wanting to work with the Redevelopment Commission and the council members to get a major financing package together to get our matches for these ready projects, as well as all of these neighborhood plans. There are a lot of costs to implement these plans, and we're gonna fall behind if we don't act aggressively to get the financing in place. So now that gets us into where we are as we go into this year's budget, and our strategic priorities are the same as last year's: strong neighborhoods, safe community for everyone, robust, sustainable infrastructure, equitable access to opportunity, and youth and workforce development. And so I won't read all of these. I think, council members, we appreciate you submitting your priorities so we could incorporate as many as we could into the budget that we're proposing at the start of this part of the budget season. But I think there's a lot of alignment, as I said last year, alignment between what residents want, what the council wants, and what the administration is working on. And so street paving, curbs and sidewalks, so that neighborhood infrastructure piece, traffic calming, Wi-Fi expansion. I know there's a specific one here, park in the 5th District. We've heard that a few times, and we're working on that. Tree trimming, some of that maintenance. I believe alley maintenance was also up there. Then there's some more district level kind of priorities, and there's other pieces that are not necessarily budget related, but quality of life ordinances are critical, and other pieces. So, and then housing, I will say just up front, you saw that we're still working to get the ARP dollars out on housing. So you won't see a lot of new housing funding proposed in the 2023 budget, but know that there is a lot of housing funding that is in the pipeline that we're working through. And then safe community for everyone. Again, real-time crime center, drug enforcement, police technology upgrades. Obviously, we know we're short officers, so getting that back up, figuring out how to get that back to full staffing levels, mental health, and these priorities were submitted a couple months ago, so it's important to note, and continue to address homelessness. Then on economic development, jobs, youth employment program, incentives for training South Bend High School graduates for jobs, access to minority contractors getting contracts, digital inclusion across the city. So these are things, and I don't know if, if every colleague shared each other's priorities, but, if not, these are what, if you don't recognize submitting this, one of your colleagues may have submitted it, or did submit it. And then finally, leading city team, better customer service, retain and attract top talent, increased engagement for the 2023 budget process. And so that goes right into, we have brought back the Build the Budget initiative, where we seek to get as much input from our residents as we can. And the games are back. I don't know if you saw that at Meet the Mayor the other night, but for those who were there. But the budget games are back at community events. There's also the online feedback survey that you can find at the website. You can call 311 and leave budget priorities, or you can come to the in-person meetings that will be announced soon. So then I just wanted to give a high-level overview of some of the things we're especially excited about in the 2023 budget. Of course, our controller, Dan Parker, will work through the details on all these and more. And our department heads as well will come in and share the details. But we are increasing the staffing, budgeted staffing level. We're not changing, the organization of the police department, but from a practical standpoint, we are optimistic we will have more officers, especially if we follow through with a good contract. We're in negotiations right now with the FOP. But if we have a good contract and we continue on the course that we're on right now, we expect to have, we expect to get closer and closer to full staffing levels within 2023. And so because of that, the budget reflects that we're not in the place where we were this year, where we took down the budgeted number, not because that's where we wanted to be, it was just realistic. That's where we were going to be. So we're back up to full staffing levels in the budget. We've also placed in the budget the personnel necessary to make the real-time crime center operations a reality. We have also the rebuilding our streets plan, even though inflation has driven the costs of paving higher than any of us would like. We do have the funding necessary in the budget to carry out the plan as envisioned in the rebuilding our streets plan. We have $300,000 for mental health, and that's in addition to the $1.3 million roughly in both years 23 and 24 that come from ARP for the Crisis Response Center. Now, this was under the line item, County Partnerships for Mental Health and Homelessness, and we just recently received a pro forma on this, and so the question is, what happens, beyond the initial years? How do you make this sustainable? And that's something, before we were able to launch it, is that we need to figure out what's the plan for 25, 26, and beyond. But, the dollars are there between the county and the city for at least the first two, for the startup and the first 2 years of operations. We're still in figuring out how to move forward beyond that. We also, as I mentioned, we have the budget for new neighborhood plans for Lasalle Park and River Park. We have additional alley maintenance capacity. This was a highlighted need from multiple council members, and we've heard from the community as well. And this, I believe, and Mr. Parker, you can correct me, this doubles our alley maintenance capacity by adding, basically it's another team with another machine and a team to operate it. There's a tree planting matching fund initiative at $50,000. We've heard about the need for more trees in our city as one way to sequester carbon that addresses climate, but also is a appealing part of every neighborhood is having neighborhood trees. Doubling traffic calming funding in the structural budget. So this year, as you know, we doubled the neighborhood infrastructure budget by using ARP dollars. But this one is doubling the traffic calming line item in the local dollars, not ARP dollars, to $800,000 in 2023. And I don't remember if City Engineer Kara Boyles has come to you with the street calming plan, but, you can certainly, happy to provide details on why we think there is a need for this increase in 2023. Not necessarily something that has to go indefinitely, but for 2023 to catch up on all the street calming needs. That's why it's doubled in the next year's budget proposal. There are a lot of major water and sewer capital projects that we discussed during the rates. That was part of the plan, of the rates plan, and so they've gone through the planning process, and now we're getting ready to actually break ground and get those done. And if you recall, those were considered to be, most of those projects were considered to be financed, so they would look to bring a bond before you to finance those projects sometime in the next several months. Completion of athletic court repairs, of course, we were hopeful that the $1.6 million in ARP would be enough to do all those courts. Unfortunately, we've spent or we've obligated, I don't know if it's fully out the door, but we've obligated the $1.6 million of ARP, and we didn't get through the list that we shared. So that's $600,000 in addition to work our way through that list. Similarly, the Dream Center, we've gone through that process, and the cost is higher than we anticipated. And so what we're looking to do here is we do believe we'll be able to get outside funding like we have for a lot of other major projects like the Morris or Howard Park. So it's a $6 million total in the budget here, but we're expecting $2 million net to local funds and raise the $4 million from outside sources, including we did submit to the Ready, and there are other applications out too. Next item is we've heard that the community would really like to see the ethnic festival come back. One of the reasons why, from my understanding, why it went away were safety concerns, and we do believe that if we have the appropriate setup and staffing, that we can maintain safety and also bring back the ethnic festival. So that's what you see there. A lot of that money will go to safety measures and staffing measures to make that a reality. There are new inspectors proposed to boost the RSVP and code programs. There's continued investments in climate action plan. There's a revamped VPA structure emphasizing community program, as well as adding a new arts equity position. And then you'll find a few targeted wage increases for hard-to-recruit positions. So this is, as we said at the top, this environment, this is the reason why the Federal Reserve aims to maintain stable prices, because when you don't know what prices are going to be, you don't know, it makes it almost impossible to plan. You don't know what things are going to cost. You don't know what wages need to be able to get talent into these positions. And so, and we've already found this this year. We have a number of job openings that are higher than we've had ever before. And this is not, unique to the city of South Bend or city government. This is every employer out there is trying to figure out how do they get people to fill these spots and do good work for them. So I jump to the next slide. So kind of obvious, inflation. This is probably the most complicated budget in the sense of, your budgeting requires you to forecast both costs and expected revenue. And in an environment where prices are so uncertain, that makes it hard. We don't know, we saw assessments go up at pretty high levels. We see wages going up at a pretty good clip too, but we don't know how that's going to exactly work through and become revenue to the city in terms of income taxes or property taxes. So the revenue side, we have to make some judgments about what we think those will be, but we also have to make judgments about how much we think things are going to cost, like paving or asphalt and other materials, as well as wages. We have to try to figure out what wages do we need to be competitive and get good people in those spots. The good news is we do, as we share in the annual financial updates in February, we have good, healthy reserves. So if we were on the, on a thin margin, this uncertainty could be really problematic. But because we have very healthy reserves, we should be able to navigate this uncertainty, and we're going to have to, pivot and adjust as we learn what do wages need to be, and what are things going to cost, and then how much revenue are we getting in over time. Something else, another takeaway, I think that Mr. Parker will get into in a little bit is, as you recall, the past couple of years, we've had a budget deficit in the general plus funds, and we've actually never had a deficit the last couple of years. We've actually had surpluses in actual revenue versus expenditures. So when we present budgeted debt, it doesn't necessarily, or deficit, doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to realize that deficit. And so, the piece, so it all comes together in that we have healthy reserves. We can, we're not operating on the thinnest of margins, but we do have this structural deficit long-term that we will grow in, we need to grow into. And so it's when folks propose a new ongoing expenditure that is ongoing year after year after year, that is not something we can pivot from, that's not something that, we're already in a structural deficit in that regard. I don't know if that makes sense, but so we need to, this is the tricky part about budgeting. Like I said, we have the healthy reserves, so we can, we can navigate, and we can get to where we need to be, get through these uncertain times, and we'll be okay. But we do need to be careful about long-term obligations. And so anything new that's a long-term obligation, we need to be very careful about. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to the pro.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members. So following that, I'm just going to go briefly through high-level numbers on the 2023 proposed budget. This is the only opportunity, or one of the only opportunities that I have through the budget cycle to talk through revenue. So we're going to talk a little bit about revenue and where we stand from a cash perspective, and then how we got to the overall high-level numbers on the expense side, which is really what constitutes the annual city budget, and then talk through sort of what the process will look like over the next number of weeks that we'll all be together going through this. So as we talked through over the past few years, when we start to put together the annual city budget back in May, as Councilmember Niskotsky talked about, the first thing we looked at is where we're going to be from a cash perspective. The mayor already has shared with council, and we continue to share with council, that we continue to be in a strong cash position. So you can see up here our projected 12/31 of this year, where we expect to end 2022 from a cash standpoint. Right about $230 million total. The division between the funds here, if I could just talk briefly about what that division means. The general plus funds, council members might remember, that is usually thought of as like just the general operating expenditures from the city, so governmental expenditures. A lot of that money that comes from the general plus funds goes to police and fire. That's the primary expenditures from those funds. Also supports the Department of Community Investment, administrative departments, council, clerk, mayor, and then finance, legal department, those kinds of things. But those are sort of the primary core governmental operations for the city. Then you'll see another category on there called other operating funds. Those are additional operating funds for the city. So for instance, the waterworks operating fund, the sewage works operating fund, the solid waste operating fund. A lot of those are enterprise funds, which means they are funded by fees as opposed to taxes, like the governmental funds, but they are operational funds. You'll then see a category called special revenue funds. Those are things that are sort of peripheral to the core governmental operations, things that are oftentimes grant funds. So specific grants have funds that are, for instance, we utilize a fund to run the CDBG and ESG programs from the Department of Community Investments, and that's a special revenue fund, but the sort of fund that has a dedicated purpose for a very specific program or initiative. You'll see capital and debt service funds on there. Capital projects typically are funded from specific funds, as well as individual departments might have capital funds. And then you'll see a category called internal service funds. Internal service funds are departments or divisions or operations that serve the city. So for instance, our garage, our central services division is who takes care of city vehicles and maintains city facilities. That is run out of an internal service fund. Our self-insured health insurance is also an internal service fund, so you'll see the cash level there. All total, you can see we're projected to be about $230 million. Our cash reserve requirement, which is how much cash we should keep on hand to make sure that we have a buffer in case of potential concerns or variations in revenue down the road, is projected to be about $126 million. So you can see we have substantially more cash on hand than what our minimum cash reserve requirement is. And as the mayor said, that provides some flexibility for us. The second thing we do when we put together the city budget is we look at those cash reserves and then we add to those cash reserves what our projected revenue is. And as I said, this is one of the only times during the budget process I get to talk about revenue. So to just kind of walk through some of these numbers at a high level, the top two revenue sources listed on here, property taxes and local income taxes, represent the generic and the baseline funding for most of our governmental operations. So looking at those two revenue sources, because they're very important to funding our overall operations, on the property tax side, we are projecting a pretty substantial increase from 2022 to 2023, about a 7.5% to 8% increase, which is more than what we've seen in the past few years. As the mayor mentioned, we have seen a pretty substantial growth over the past several years in net assessed value, which is because of where we're at in Indiana with property tax caps. Our property taxes are basically driven by increases or decreases to net assessed value. So as net assessed value goes up, our revenue projections from property tax go up as well. The difference between the green and the blue on this slide is just the difference between civil city and TIF financing. So if you might remember, the number on this screen of $61 million, that is the civil city portion of this, the portion that's coming to the city general fund primarily, and then also going to fund Parks and Recreation has their own property tax levy as well. So that's that $61.6 million in green, and then projecting close to $30 million in TIF as well on the property tax side. On the income tax side, a little bit of a different story. We are projecting an increase. Incomes are going up. Part of that has to do with inflation, right? As inflation rises, incomes go up, but our income taxes then also go up. Not quite at the same level, so we don't expect it to keep pace with inflation necessarily, but we do project an increase from 2022 to 2023 on the income tax side. A couple things to note on this slide. The yellow portion, the different portions of this graph, the light blue, yellow, dark blue, and orange, are different types of income tax that we receive. So the yellow portion is what's known as certified shares income tax. And you can see that decreased pretty significantly from 2021 to 2022. That decrease was actually based on the reorganization of income tax that had to do with the funding of the PSAP Center. So council might remember our income tax was reduced and a portion of that income tax was then sent directly to the PSAP Center. And that will continue. So if you're asking why did income tax go down so significantly from 21 to 22, that's the primary reason, is that we used to pay directly an assessment to PSAP. We no longer do that. Instead, they're funded by income tax that is no longer coming to us. The other thing to mention on this slide is that little orange section at the top of each one of the past few years. That is if the state fund that collects income tax, if that reaches a certain level, local units are actually distributed a supplemental income tax amount. So they keep the amount of income tax that they receive in a fund. They project how much they're going to receive every year, and that's how they figure out how much to give to local units. But if they collect more than they think they're going to collect, then they provide a supplemental distribution to local units. And you can see every year since 2018, we have received a supplemental distribution. Usually it's in the neighborhood of a few $1 million, and we did receive one in 2022 as well. We don't plan for it, and that's why you won't see for it in the 2023 budget, but that's what that little bar represents there. To just highlight a few more of these numbers, shared revenues, these are all of the additional taxes that we receive, so things like gas tax and wheel tax, cigarette tax, vehicle excise tax, liquor excise tax, hotel, motel, or innkeeper's tax that the mayor talked about. All of those go into our shared revenue numbers. You can see we expect these numbers to be fairly consistent from 2022 to 2023. One or two of these to just highlight specifically. I always like to talk about gas tax and wheel tax, just because you can see really since 2019 or 2020, we haven't really seen a whole lot of change in this. It went up a little bit in 2018 based on some changes in legislation downstate. That legislation was then changed again in 2019, which really limited our ability to grow these funds. I like to talk about these because the gas tax and wheel tax are the only revenue sources that we have that are specifically set aside for streets. So when the mayor talks about we're fully funded on the Rebuilding the Streets plan, that's true. We're expecting about $8.1 million in revenue on specifically for streets initiatives. In the 2023 proposed budget, there is over $17 million in expenses for streets. So $8.1 million in revenue, $17 million in expenses. You guys can see that that's a tough model to sustain in the long term. And so I always like to bring that up as hopefully we can continue to grow this revenue source based on legislative changes downstate because right now our income tax funds are largely funding our streets. Again, kind of just to move down to some of these other items, charges for services, the bulk of these are going to be for utilities and solid waste. And so you can see a planned increase there, consistent with the rate increases that were passed by council. So that's the majority of that increase is going to be for water, wastewater, and solid waste based on the rate increases that were passed several years ago, or last year, whenever that was. Moving down to donations, you can see that we're expecting about a $4 million increase in donations from 2022 to 2023. The mayor mentioned that we are planning for an additional $6 million in funding for the Dream Center, and we expect outside funding sources to offset $4 million of that. So that $4 million increase is specifically budgeting for donations and outside funding sources and grants to come in to fund the Dream Center, and that is in the 2023 proposed budget. Interest earnings. I always like to highlight this because I like to say that I might be the only one that thinks about this outside of me highlighting it, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about it. And the good news, or maybe mixed news, is that we do expect interest earnings to rise in 2023.
Is now joining.
The reason why I say that that's mixed news is that the reason why we expect it to rise is because interest rates are going up, which means that some of the funding that we do and the bonds that we're going to issue, our interest rates on those bonds, or that we're going to propose to issue, our interest rates on those financings may not be quite as low as what we've seen in the past from the water and wastewater side especially, but we will make up some of that on the interest earning side on the cash that we keep in the bank. We, for 2021, are expecting right about a 1% return on our investments, which is better than 2022 about a 1%, which is better than 2021, which is good. And then we expect that to actually grow to about 1.75 to 2% in 2023. Big one, and the primary reason why you'll see at the bottom revenue going from $326 million in 2022 to $406 million in 2023 is this debt proceeds. You can see about a $50 million increase there. That is entirely for a planned bond issuance for the water and wastewater, and there'll be multiple bond issues there. But those are funding the major programs that the mayor mentioned on the capital side, and which were talked about with council in a fair amount of detail during the rates conversations. So those are in the budget for 2023. So that's the revenue side. Moving on to the expense side, these numbers are fairly small, and I'm not going to go very deep into them because this is what the subject of the next 8 or 9 weeks will be. But you can sort of see where we're at in the second from the right column on the 2023 budget. About a $425 million budget all told. As that note in the bottom left corner says, this excludes the redevelopment commission, so that does not include the TIF spending, but from a civil city side only, about $425 million budget. Councilmember Nizgotsky, in her opening remarks, referenced this dichotomy between baseline spending and strategic spending. One of the reasons why I like that is because if you look at the year-over-year variance, you can see that the vast majority of those increases from 2022 to 2023 are coming on the strategic side. And most of them actually specifically within the infrastructure segment on strategic initiatives, which again relate primarily to those water and wastewater programs. Those are large projects that will take multiple years to complete, but we do budget for the entirety of the project up front and know that that money will be spent over the next 3 or 4 years. Other than that, like I said, I'm not going to dive directly into most of these because over the next 8 or 9 weeks, we will go very deep into these specific initiatives and these specific budgets. But one thing I did want to highlight is that, and we'll talk about this in a second as well, is that unlike last year, the budget hearings themselves will not follow this specific format of talking about baseline spending as a group and then talking about strategic spending separately. Rather, we will be returning to a model where each department will come and present individually. And so I did want to also show how the breakdown of the 2023 proposed budget looks from a department-by-department perspective. You can see that over 40% of the budget is in public works, again, primarily due to the large capital expenditures that are there. And then police, fire, VPA, the Department of Community Investment, and then admin and finance make up most of the rest of it. Admin and finance is maybe a little bit overblown. A lot of the debt service types of payments that don't really apply to any particular department are put into administration and finance, so that's why that pie is maybe a little bit bigger than it is just for the operations of that department alone, so I did want to make mention of that. So if you remember, the total revenue for the city from a few slides back was $406 million. And I just mentioned that the total expenditures for the city funds is $425 million. So some quick math tells us that that's about a $19 million deficit for the 2023 proposed budget. And as we have in prior years, I just wanted to talk briefly about what's driving that overall deficit. About $2.3 million is from an intentional spend down in internal service funds. Pretty much every year, we do have some intentional spend down of internal service funds. Those funds are primarily, as I said earlier, meant to serve internal city departments, and so they're funded by transfers in from other departments, and they don't really need to carry a cash balance. But when those funds do, because either they don't spend all of their budget in a particular year, or revenue's a little bit higher than we anticipate, then they carry a cash balance, and we anticipate or we plan for spending that down over time. So there's $2.3 million of that is from that. That's intentional and something that is going to probably continue in most years. There's about a $3.5 million spend down in funds that are specifically driven or specifically set aside for streets, so mainly our motor vehicle highway funds and our local roads and streets funds. Again, as I said earlier, we have about $8 million in revenue coming to these funds, and about $17 million in planned expenditures. So part of that is going to be funded by income tax. So the difference between about 11.5 and that 17 is funded by income tax. But a portion is going to be funded by actually spending some of the cash reserves that we have in those street funds to make sure that we are investing those and not just holding that cash on hand and getting that out and into the streets in the city. And then the largest portion of that $19 million deficit is going to be from our General Plus funds. So again, the General Plus funds are sort of the general governmental operations of the city. This is planned for a $13.2 million deficit in 2023. And this is often what we think of as our structural deficit, but in 2023, it is actually funding a number of different one-time expenditures. So if you want to ask why do we have a $13.2 million General Plus fund deficit, a vast majority of that is going to be going into one-time capital spending. As the mayor said in his remarks, we want to make sure that we use the historic level of cash reserves we have on hand. That gives us some flexibility to invest in the community. So a number of those projects, or most of those, have already been talked about. A $2 million net investment in the Dream Center. That's $6 million total investment, offset by $4 million in outside funding sources. That $5.5 million that I've been referencing on income tax funding for the streets, that's strategic capital for streets, that is supplementing the revenue that we get from outside sources. There's also $1 million in the budget for the zoo. That is per an agreement that we've executed with the zoo a number of years ago. In 2023, it called for $1 million capital investment in the zoo, so that is in the budget. That does not continue into future years, but it is in the budget for 2023. Oops, that was the wrong button. Then, as the mayor said earlier, there is an additional $500,000 in there for asphalt court repair. One other thing to note, in addition to the capital, in addition to that one time or those large capital expenditures, that is something the mayor said a few times, which is just we have increased costs. Inflation is something that we have had to grapple with in a way that we haven't in the past few years when we put together this budget. And there's a couple areas where this hit us particularly hard. Fuel is one. So anybody who's gone to the gas pump in the last few months knows this. The city has over 1,000 vehicles that we drive, and particularly in departments like police, fire, solid waste. There's the increase in gas costs and diesel cost hits pretty hard. And so we went from in 2022 budgeting about $2.30 a gallon to in 2023 budgeting over $4 a gallon. Now, gas prices have come down a little bit over the past month, and so we hope that we can continue to ride that, and maybe it won't be at the $4 level, but you'll see that in the budget, that fuel is pretty consistently going to be far above what we've seen in the 2022 levels. Another area, which is not one that I would necessarily have thought of immediately, but has been something to grapple with, is chemicals. So we use a lot of chemicals in treating water, in treating wastewater, in fertilizer for golf and for parks. And those chemicals have skyrocketed in price. And so as we go through the departments, again, you'll see a theme of increasing costs, particularly in those areas. And then something the mayor mentioned as well, which I'll get into in just a second, wages. So wages is going to be a continuing topic of conversation on how we can make sure that we're providing wages that are going to attract, retain top talent, while dealing with the fact that we do have a little bit of a structural deficit here, and our revenue sources are not really keeping pace with the cost of inflation right now. The other thing to note on why this $13.2 million deficit exists in the proposed budget is something that the mayor said specifically, that the budgeted deficit is not equal to the actual deficit. And so that's important for all of us to keep in mind. And to just give a little bit of a history over the past few years, over in 2020, our budget for the general plus funds was balanced, so we had a zero deficit in 2020, and we finished the year with over a $13 million surplus in those funds. In 2021, we budgeted for about a $5 million deficit, and we finished with almost a $10 million surplus, and then in 2022, we budgeted for a $6.3 million deficit, and as of June 30th of this year, we are running about a $2.7 million surplus. So the obvious question is why? Why are the budgeted numbers so much different than our actual numbers? It's driven by a lot of different factors. The two main contributors to it that I would pull out is stronger than expected revenue. So one of these things that I mentioned earlier, that supplemental income tax, when we get $2 or $3 million in supplemental income tax revenue, that's not something we planned on. And so sometimes that drives a budget surplus because we didn't budget for the expenditures related to that. And we can then budget for those in future years, which then drives a deficit in those years. So property taxes the same way. We planned for a pretty significant decrease in property taxes in 2020 related to the fiscal curb, and saw ourselves sort of grow out of that a little bit. And property tax decreases weren't as big as we thought they would be. They did decrease, but not by as much as we thought, which again helped us have a little bit stronger financial performance than what we budgeted for. So that's one big contributor to this. The other one is cost savings, and the biggest one there is personnel. So we budget as if we are going to be fully staffed all year long, which we know is not the case. And is never going to be the case, but that's the way we budget. So when we budget, for instance, 240 officers in the police department, we know that they may not be fully staffed for the entire year. And it's not just the police department. Every department is going to experience natural turnover over time, and on average we have in the neighborhood of 60 to 70 open positions in any normal given year. Because of some of the economic factors that we've been facing, low unemployment, a decreasing employment labor pool, we actually have far more than 60 positions open right now. I think the last I looked, it was 110 or 115 open positions out of a total employment base of a little over 1,100 employees. So that if we are planning for fully staffed all year long and we have 110 open positions, salaries and benefits, you can imagine that's in the neighborhood of $7, $8, $9 million in cost savings just by having open positions on average. So you can start to see how a budgeted deficit might be converted into an actual surplus. That's not something we can or should continue to plan for. I think that there is, as the mayor mentioned earlier, a actual structural deficit that we have, and we're going to need to continue to grapple with over the next few years as we hopefully start to spend down some of these cash reserves that we have. But that is why we are in the position of putting forward a $13.2 million general plus fund deficit at this point. The last thing I wanted to go through before I get to sort of the process side of this is personnel assumptions. On the non-bargaining personnel side, we have plugged in a 3% raise from 2022 as the baseline raise. As the mayor mentioned, there are a number of specific individual positions that are going to be requesting raises that are in excess of that, and we'll call those out as we go through the different departments as normal. But the baseline for those positions not specifically called out is right now budgeted at 3% raise. The other thing that the budget currently reflects is an increase in the city residency incentive. So a few council members actually raised this as something that is something to definitely continue to support and to push, is raising that city residency incentive. It's currently, for the first year in 2022, budgeted is set at $1,000. The budget for 2023 proposes raising that to $2,000 for non-bargaining personnel that live within city limits. For sworn firefighters, we are under contract. We are in year 2 of that contract, which is a 2.5% raise per the agreement. And then we are in year 2 of the agreement with Teamsters as well, which is budgeted at a 2% raise. One thing we did want to mention is that we would propose, and we are proposing in the budget, raising the city residency incentive for Teamsters to be on par with the non-bargaining employees. We did that via an MOU, which was then supported by council earlier this year, which would be the same mechanism that we would use here to raise it from $1,000 to $2,000. But we do want to make sure that we maintain that parity on the city residency incentive between Teamsters and non-bargaining, and continue to incentivize individuals and city employees to live within city limits. Lastly, sworn police contract negotiations are ongoing. So right now there is a placeholder number in the budget. The numbers in the budget, numbers which will be presented actually next week at the police department budget hearing, are based on a 2% raise. That is meant to be sort of an average over the past few years. Prior to the last 2 years, a 2% raise was sort of a baseline neutral position, but we do expect those numbers to change based on the results of the contract negotiation. And so as that process plays out, we will obviously be making adjustments to the proposed budget to reflect the negotiated agreement. All right, so lastly, from a process standpoint, just to put up the 2023 budget hearing schedule. So obviously here we are tonight at the budget overview. And then for the next few weeks, the next 2 weeks, we'll hear from police department and fire department, as well as VPA. There will be a council working session on Tuesday, September 6th. We'll then hear from Public Works and Department of Community Investment over the 2 weeks after that, followed by a second council working session. We'll hear from Admin and Finance, INT, and Diversity and Inclusion. And then we will have on Monday, September 26th, the public hearing on the 2023 budget, which is the formal presentation of the budget at the 7 p.m. council meeting, and then finish the council budget hearings with the mayor's office, legal department, clerk, and council on the 28th, and then finally just a wrap-up and a hearing of transposed budget on October the 6th. The proposed tentative date for the vote on the budget would be October the 10th, which is the first council meeting in October. As we did last year, we will be giving out budget packets for each one of these budget presentations after this one. That budget packet will contain a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that council will see, a summary sheet of all the spending, a personnel summary, including any changes that are proposed to that personnel, either new positions, changes in position titles, increases above that standard 3%, those kinds of things. And then a complete listing of personnel in each area, and then finally a line level budget detail. So that's where we'll be going over the next number of weeks. And with that, I am sure that I would be happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure Mayor Mueller would as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker, for your presentation, and for Mayor Mueller for your comments as well at the beginning. So at this point, I'm going to come to the committee. If there's any committee members here that have any questions for the mayor or for Mr. Parker. Mr. Warren?
No questions, really. Just thank you. Look forward to seeing more in the next 8 weeks. I do have one kind of comment. I think the most positive feedback I get and comments from folks on a very consistent, regular basis is regarding the streets and the streets plan and the additional funds that we've put towards the streets the last 2 years. They can see the results of that. And I consistently every week hear positive feedback and comments on that. And thank you for that. Organizing that, and I'm very happy to fund that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wax?
I will piggyback on Councilmember Warner's comments. First of all, just to backtrack, thank you for your presentations. I always appreciate the high-level overview before we get into the real fun weeds. But as far as the infrastructure and streets and sidewalks, that is something that is tangible to all residents of South Bend from every corner of the city, and a budget that puts a lot of emphasis on the actual physical structure and investment into the city is always, I think, is the way to go. One of, and you could tell me if you want to say this for later, but one of the investments that we talked about in physical infrastructure, you mentioned planting new trees. I just was curious to know how that would interact with the maintenance of the trees, which is something that we have been struggling with, is tree overgrowth, sidewalk damage as a result of trees. So I just want to make sure I understand that before we spend more money on trees, which I like the idea, I just want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for more infrastructure failures down the road.
Councilmember Wax, we appreciate that concern, and the administration shares that concern too. So that will be in the Venue Parks and Arts presentation. Hopefully we'll be able to dig deeper into tree trimming and this tree matching initiative.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Davis?
I don't have anything right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we're going to go to any council members. I have Councilman Lee here.
Yes. Again, thank you for the presentation and helping us to get an idea of what we're looking forward to in the budget presentation. There's going to be allocations for additional alley maintenance. Could you go over that one more time? Because one of the biggest concerns that we're hearing from residents is that our alleys are in bad shape. So how is that going to address those issues?
So there are two pieces of this. There's the piece of the vegetation in the alleys, and that's not what I highlighted. Like, again, there are going to be a lot of things in every one of the individual, when the individual departments come, that they can talk through. But we highlighted the alley maintenance of the roadway or the alleyway itself. by basically doubling our capacity of crew and equipment to address the alleys.
And then the $1.3 million for the Crisis Response Center. uh, um, Just to expand a little bit more on that.
Sure, this is the partnership with the County Health Department, Beacon, and other community members. And the thought there is to have a place, a center, with clinicians and facilities. They're looking at the Epworth building over there on the East Bank. And so, again, we just received kind of a detailed, we're still trying to sort through the long-term pieces of that before we're able to really say, okay, here's where we're going. But we do know that looking at the pro forma that we've received is between the county's ARP spending and the amount that we have reserved from the ARP spending and the county partnerships line item, that we have the dollars for the first 2 years. The question is what happens after that. And once, similar, it's going to be a similar question for the county. We talked about this. We have reserves. We're able to do things now, but we need to be focusing on the one-time things, because things that are ongoing over time, we are going to have to figure this out as we navigate the pricing and other things.
Those are hot button issues that I was concerned about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman White, I believe you're the only one joining us online. Is that correct, Clerk Jones? Is there another? So do you have any comments?
No, just want to thank both the mayor and Mr. Parker for the presentation. Good information, a lot of homework that we need to go through and look through as we prepare for our next budget hearings. But I would like to say that I have received positive feedback, as others have stated, in regards to the street repairment program and how the neighbors are responding to not only that, but also the curbs and sidewalks. I did want to ask, and maybe this will be in the upcoming hearing that the parks will be presenting. I did not see any plans for Potawatomi pool.
Yeah.
Will that be in this budget, or is that going to be through when Mr. Perry gives his presentation?
Sure. I mean, Mr. Perry can get more into where we are in his budget presentation, but I'll just give kind of the broad view. I don't, so, I mean, I know there have been a lot of concerns about the pool closure, and this is something, it's a roughly 60-year-old pool. For a number of years, we've been able to open on time and throughout the season by replacing the liner. Obviously that's, that fix only lasts so long. And this year was a year when the liner wasn't able to be installed due to the underlying structure having issues. And so we performed a structural assessment. I haven't seen, if we've gotten results back, we probably have, I just haven't seen them yet. And figuring out, are we able to extend the life of the pool for a few years while we work on both the River Park neighborhood plan and also the Potawatomi Park master plan. So those are, we're looking to do those in conjunction with each other starting next year. But we would like to do a planning process. So our hope is that we would be able to, for better, kind of figure out how to get it to operate for another couple years as we figure out longer-term solutions. But we'll have to wait for the structural, we'll get an update on the structural assessment to you as soon as possible, too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And my last question or comment is that I'm very appreciative of all the neighborhood plans that are currently in the making or at point for bring before the council, but also for the future ones that would come for the year 2023. I think that as we look at our neighborhoods and engaging our citizens and that they are empowered to be part of the process is a very positive move and one that can bring about great results. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, what's that, Councilman
I have a
Davis?
question I wanted to ask you. Has there been a meeting between this committee, chair and administration on expectations as it relates to departmental presentations?
The consensus from everybody's budget request that was made was that they wanted to go back to each department presenting their own budgets, which is why Mr. Parker changed the format from last year to this year. It was a consensus among the 9 members.
Sure, but I'm going to get into the weeds of that real quick. I'm not going to be too long. When the department presents, they present their overall budget, things that they did before, things that they're looking to do later on. Is it performance-based, or is it just a clear overview of what happens and then an ask for support for the next budget for 2023?
It's going to be an overall presentation of each department's budget requests.
Okay, and so are there any metrics going to be applied to those requests?
I haven't seen them, so I don't know. And now I would like to go on to the public portion of the meeting.
Excuse me, I'd like to ask my question.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Councilwoman Hammond. Please proceed with your questions.
Thank you. I have a couple of requests, which I guess go along with questions. For the programs such as the home repair program, when the budget for that is presented, if we could also get an overview of the oversight plan on those types of programs. So how will they be monitored? What type of oversight is intended for those plans? That would be very, very helpful. The tree planting matching program, just a comment on that. If we are asking a 50% split from the residents and the city, where the need is greatest for these trees tends to be in the area of the city with the least ability to pay. So it seems to be at pretty significant odds here. These folks are not in a position to pay 50%. That's just my perception of that. So if that could be explained perhaps a little further.
Just to clarify, I don't, and again, this can get into the VPA presentation, but I don't believe it's designed to be a 50-50 match. It'll probably take the lessons learned from the sidewalk program and others. The matching is actually outside dollars, matching city dollars for this program. I mean, is that correct?
Oh,
So
my
we would
mistake
have
then.
$100,000, so it's a matching with outside funding. That's not the structure of, how it would work with residents.
Sounds fabulous. Thank you. That addresses that concern. Also, when we have not had a chance to fully vet the amendments that were brought forth regarding vegetation and trees, but part of the conversation with the department heads had to do with a VPA program that would also need to be funded. Mr. Perry, you remember that conversation? Will that be part of this budget conversation, including that program?
Yeah, and I think we're meeting on it next week to tee that up.
Okay, that sounds fabulous. And then,
Okay, Councilwoman Hammond, you are allowed 2 questions. You were like on council,
I
on no,
just
question
have
number
a whole
4.
lot. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Because I would like to get the public input as well. Does that cover all the council members? To make sure I know Rachel is not here. I believe that's it. Did I get everybody? Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to go to the public meeting portion of the meeting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the comments, I guess? It's a little different. If you could state your name and address for the record,
Yes.
please.
Hello,
Hi.
council people, neighbors. My name is Patricia G. Smith. I live at 817 O'Brien Street, South Bend, Indiana, and it says something about ESP jewelry. When is that going to be removed? Over on Elwood. We've been waiting a long time for that to be removed, and the city decided that they wanted the area over there on Lincoln Way and Wilbur. It's down. That building is down. It was down in about a month and a half. We've been waiting forever for the jewelry place to be removed and made pretty like the place over on Lincoln Way and Wilbur. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and I don't like the trash in the front. The trash needs to be in the alleys. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Parker or Mayor Mueller, would you like to address her concerns, please?
Yes, we want to take care of these properties as quickly as possible. The property on Lincoln Way was an emergency demolition order. The Drury site, we are in the process of gaining ownership of the property. We have crossed all of we got the tax deeds certificates from the county commissioners earlier this year. We moved through the process where the former property owner could contest it. So we're past all of the big hurdles. We are just on the final hurdle of getting full title of this property before doing so. But then once that happens, then we should be announcing within a matter of weeks a plan and a timeline for dealing with the Drury site.
Is there anyone else present wishing to speak? Okay, either in favor or against? Okay, at this point then I'm going to go online. I do see, I believe Clerk Jones, one person, but I want to make sure I don't miss anybody.
Yes, we have Jordan Geiger. Jordan, if you would unmute yourself and state your name and your address for the record, please.
Jordan Geiger, 424 South Michigan Street, Unit 616, South Bend, Indiana, 46601. I just had a couple questions. The first one is about the home repair program and the dollars for housing financing from the ARP funds. I know from what I've been told, the city is going to take RFPs in sometime this fall, and my question is around do you know, does the administration know who they want to work with, and if there will be opportunities for for home rehabilitation efforts to be funded? And then my second question is about I think there was $300,000 proposed for mental health supports. Is that funding potentially or is that funding for a pilot program for the mobile health crisis unit? Or just those two questions.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, would you like to address those questions?
Sure, those are great questions. In the ARP line items, you'll see both home repair and the housing financing. I will have to check with the team exactly about if the RFP for the housing financing would be more than just new construction, would be renovation. I don't know the answer to that offhand. It could be, but it will be an open RFP and looking to work with those who can get the work done and help move our neighborhoods forward. And then on the mental health, I mean, as many know, we've been in conversations for a while and looking to the pilot program with Oaklawn and working with both our 911 center to figure out procedures, as well as county partners and Oaklawn on potential how to move these mobile crisis teams. This does fit somewhat with, as we've seen in some of the commentary about, with the Crisis Center we mentioned, that's a partnership with Beacon, County Health, and others, to make sure that there's also a place for folks to bring folks who are experiencing mental health crises in our community. So they do, they fit together in many ways, but you know, we're all frustrated with that we haven't been able to roll them out quicker than we have, but you know, when partnerships are involved, that does sometimes slow things down, and it is more complex. So when we're talking about the 911 center, for example, routing certain calls to certain teams. I mean, 911 is when a resident calls, they expect the right person or persons to show up to help them. And so making sure we have, you know, the right protocols and all of that, so the right people are showing up at the right time has been critical. So but we're working through them as quickly as possible, and that's kind of an estimate. There's no, you know, with the Crisis Center, we finally received a pro forma that shows costs and expected revenue sources. We don't have quite such a thing for this piece, but that's a rough estimate right now.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there anyone else wishing to, from the public, to speak?
That exhausts our list. There's no one else.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to the council members. Is there any comments from any council members? Councilmember White, do you have any comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilwoman Hammond?
Yes, I would just like to say, Mr. Parker, at some point, I would like to revisit our pilot conversation from last year.
Excited.
Thank you.
Okay, then at this time, I'm going to call the meeting adjourned.
Thank you. I'll have to look back exactly at what your questions were, I'll dig it back up.
It was a fun debate.
Yes.
It was great.
Is now exiting.
So what I want to do is see if we can move that one to possibly
gotta start working on our budget. I'm just taking notes.
You were counting on my vote. That was a bad strategy. I'm not saying you wouldn't support it. I'm not saying you wouldn't support it. I'm just saying. 17 million for streets, 80 million for water and sewer infrastructure. Yeah, September and October is really, they decided the budget schedule, they didn't anticipate what the next year would be.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
26, I'm out. 18, I'm out.
Are you really?
Yeah. Yeah, I gave you my schedule and you just knew that we were gonna.
Right, right. Yeah, because that's the kind of thing you did. Yeah, well, hey, if it gets pushed, that would be frustrating. Yeah, in case there's like, people are like, oh no, we gotta change this. We usually try and say,